Hi everyone, Simon here with the first of a series of videos around Steam Next Fest February 23. This is all about playing the demos, telling you what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and whether it stayed on my wishlist or not. And this video is all about rhythm games. The first one up is called Bandroll, and this is a pure rhythm action game, although it doesn't look like it, it looks like a marble runner. You play as this ball that's a bit like a disco ball, going down the centre track, almost like a bobsleigh, and you use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move left and right to move between different lanes, but also up to the ceiling and back down to the floor again by pressing up and down. And this took me a little while to get used to. What took me longer to get used to is the fact that there are also banked lanes as well. So in order to ride those, it's like grinding on a skateboard. So you have to press and hold left and right and then let go at the end to return back to centre. I kept killing myself because I got so obsessed with having to return back to centre. I was pressing left and right to do it, which counts as you flipping to the other side. And so that just took me a while to try and unlearn that pattern. I quite like this game. It's got a decent electronica soundtrack to it. The thing that kind of put me off slightly is chromatically it moves between all of the chromatic colours in the lightning effects in the background, and sometimes that made it quite difficult to see in the darker, murkier tones. And that, combined with the fact that there was no calibration settings in the demo, meant that the music was slightly out from where you were supposed to move, and so I was quite often moving slightly early, and so I wasn't getting perfects. But if I was moving slightly late, in my head I'd missed the beat. So that just needs a little bit of toning up. But yeah, I was quite impressed with this, and it feels relatively unique from a rhythm action perspective because it feels like you're rhythmically skateboarding. So yeah, quite like this one. The next one up is called Blue Wednesday, and I really liked this. It's a story-driven narrative experience that's entirely around rhythm action minigames. The main one is that you're playing as a character who wants to be a jazz pianist, and so whenever he sees a piano, get your words out, Simon, he'll sit down and play it, and he's made his own songs, and then you get to play it, and it works like a DJ Max 4 track column. So you've got like playing again on a controller again, you've got left and up on the D-pad, then Y and B on the Xbox controller, but triangle and circle on a PlayStation, whatever you're doing. So as the notes come down, you can kind of just hit those as they go. The rhythm action tracks play really well with the piano, and I was quite surprised at that because it feels quite rhythmic in the way how you're using left hand, right hand for upper and lower octaves. But also outside of that mini game, where you're playing all of these notes and kind of boistering up your performance, there's loads of other mini games that are rhythmic too. So your character works in a grocery store and works on the checkout. So as people kind of loading up their shopping, you're scanning the checkouts to what's coming through, so it feels quite rhythmic there. As you're walking home, because this game is all around feeling blue about not being able to be creative, you go off into your imagination and like magical lights start to appear and you hear jazz music in your head, and so it starts to put together like little mini puzzles to hit buttons to trigger off like bass or electric guitar solos and things like that. It felt really well rounded and an interesting story, I think, for anyone who's quite creative or musically gifted, for example, who wants to go and tap into that, but the world wants you to be a slave to the corporate world. And that kind of play off against things about following your dreams, I think could be quite powerful. This is absolutely staying on my wish list, and my expectations of this game grew the further I got into the demo because I was really enjoying it. The next game up is called God of Rock. Now this reminds me heavily of the PS1 and PS2 games of Buster Groove, or Buster Moved if you was in Japan, and of a very lesser known Dance Magic game on the PlayStation 3 era, which wasn't particularly great, but done the same thing. It's a player versus player dance-em-off, but this is done as a beat-em-up. So you pick your character, you pick your stage, you pick your music, and each player gets the same rhythm chart, but obviously if you hit notes it starts to hurt your HP, especially if that other player gets it because they're landing a punch when you haven't. So the idea is that you're trying to build up combos by using the notes on your side to basically chain up the moves and chain up the punches and attacks. And what that does is that builds up your meter at the bottom. Then, when you get a spare few seconds, you can trigger off some special moves that will either add additional notes to the other person's track, very much like chucking across garbage in Tetris, or columns, or whatever your puzzle game of choice is. But there are other special moves that each character has uniquely as well. So, like the Elvis one, speeds up your track very, very quickly, but makes it difficult to catch all of those notes. So I really, really liked this. I really liked how each song felt very different and unique in terms of its rhythm track. It didn't feel like it was aimless. It felt like a proper rhythm action game that was competitive. And that makes its distinction away from quite a lot of other kind of, oh, it's a rhythm game, but it's a beat 'em up, but it's a competition, ha ha ha, which I see copied once every year and a half. This feels like it's really well done from the ground up with this concept. I also really like the fact that this game, the longer you progress, you start moving up the tiers of difficulty for what the rhythm track for the song is, and it warns you this game will keep going until someone wins eventually, and so it cranks up that difficulty and makes it more tricky and difficult, and eventually someone falters and falls over. So really, really like this. Again, staying on my wish list. Along with Blue Wednesday, I think these two are possibly day ones for me. Next up is Rina Rhythmerror, which is a 3-button rhythm action game. Very traditional in that you're using just lanes of notes coming towards you. A on the Xbox controller controls the centre one, and then it was the 2 bumper buttons on the controller for the left and right, which took me a little bit of getting used to. But everything else felt very, very traditional rhythm action, just with a really unique and interesting setup. It's a virus from the future that started to embed inside audio files. So you've got to write the audio file and then delete the virus at the end. What I quite liked about this, aside from its use of chiptunes for like starter songs, and then you'd have like battles with viruses that went off into different genres of electronica or subgenres of it. As you start to beat the boss, the screen starts glitching out and causing lots of visual issues, which might not be great if you've got epilepsy, but outside of that, it felt like a interesting twist on things. The flip side of that, though, was that I did find that because there's quite a lot of bright colours going on, there isn't a real big differentiation to what's background colour and what's the 3 notes coming down the track towards you, or the 3-note lanes. And I just found that quite messy and difficult to distinguish the contrast between the two. So if that could be sorted out slightly, I think I would be much more intrigued by Rina Rhythmerror than what I initially was. There's nothing wrong with this at all. It'll be staying on my wish list. It won't be a day one for me unless it's exceptionally cheap. But yeah, interesting premise in familiar, safe rhythm action trappings. The next game, though, we're veering away from traditional rhythm stuff, and it is a rhythm game, but not really. I'm going to call this Vampire Survivors, the rhythm version, and it's called Beatpunk. This is a top-down arena shooter style game, but it's all like an auto battle, just like Vampire Survivors. But what you're doing is beating up various enemies and collecting musical notes, which then unlock different musical instruments to build out your 16-beat bar of music. And all of your music triggers attacks. And I loved this. I thought it was really ingenious and intuitive and felt fresh and unique, because there's so many Vampire Survivor like spins on the same old thing at the minute. This feels genuinely interesting. So I'd start off with some kick drums, and then you can decide whether or not you want to where you want to put them in the 16-beat bar of music. But you can also double down and put 2 kick drums in the same 16th part. But what it does is it then makes the radius of what's going on bigger. So you can have something closer to home but hitting more often, or you can then make it a bigger kick drum but it goes wider. And then I was having in cymbals, then there was guitars, then there was arpeggiators with synths. Bass came in, and they all trigger their own unique actions. And so it was almost like building up my own one-man band musical instrument collection to attack all of these enemies. I did find with Beatpunk that it's one of those games where everything feels slow and cumbersome, and so you think it's really, really easy until you suddenly realise you're getting your ass handed to you. And so it was deceptively difficult late game in a run. And I do have some question marks over exactly like the longevity of if there isn't loads and loads of instruments to choose from in the final game. But the concept of this is brilliant, and I really enjoyed myself with it, and it will be staying on my wish list. And so long as it's expanded beyond it's not just one cymbal, one kick drum, one guitar, one bass, one keyboard, and that's all you're getting, and there's like proper variety, this will be a day one. The last game in this video is called Sound Hidden Forest, and it's sadly the one that won't be staying on my wish list. It's a musical Simon Says, or a sound-driven Simon Says. You go to a chirpy little bird who will chirp out several sounds in an order, and then what you have to do is run around interacting with all of the different objects in a level to find where that sound is, to then build up the Simon Says and sing it back to the bird to complete the stage. I think this could be quite interesting for really young children to associate different types of sounds with different objects and kind of get that sensory perception up and running. But beyond that, it's cute and it has like a certain PS1 aesthetic to it. And I quite like the idea, but it was a real one-trick pony that once I'd worked out that I could just go around and hit everything and eventually work out what the sounds were. It's a really, really simple and easy memory game and doesn't feel particularly rhythmy or actiony or skill-based because it's just the areas get bigger with more things for you to interact with. And then because you've heard some of the sounds earlier, I was able to just go straight to the conductor to do a whoosh sound, or like a little golf tee to do like a little block at the end, whatever it was. So yeah, bit of a dud for me, that one. And that is the rhythm and music section for Steam Next Fest February 2023. Let us know down in the comments if there's anything that particularly stands out for you. For me, the three biggies here were Blue Wednesday, God of Rock and Beatpunk, but I wouldn't ignore Bandroll either. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.